Ever find yourself wondering whether correction in a spiritual environment or rebuke is spiritual abuse? Well, today I'm going to be answering that question. And I want to thank one of the commenters in one of my videos who he asked what I thought about pastoral rebuke. And so I thank you for asking me that question. And I will answer that in this video as well as talk about some other things. So I'm sure that as a survivor of spiritual abuse, that you have probably dealt with correction, rebuke, whatever it is, right? And those things aren't necessarily unique to spiritually abusive environments, but they are weaponized in those environments. And a lot of times people will engage in abusive behaviors, but they will call it rebuke or correction. So I'm going to explain the difference in this video. The first thing is that when you are being rebuked or corrected, right? What is the purpose behind that, right? So if the purpose is to like, help you either develop a skill, correct something that you are doing incorrectly or whatever, if it's meant to help you grow as a person, then no, I don't think it's abusive, right? There are many ways that you can correct or even rebuke somebody for their own good. If you think about like, um, I don't know, let's say like you see a kid that's about to run into a busy street, and you're like, hey, get back here, and you pick them up to make sure that that car doesn't run by them, then that's a stern rebuke, I would say. You're raising your voice and whatnot, but you're doing that to protect that person from danger, but um if you think about maybe somebody, making fun of a kid's outfit in front of everyone and saying, it's really ugly and they're a horrible person. Well, that's abusive. And so I want you to think about that. I think the fact that you even ask that question, like, is this abusive, is probably a clue to you that something is off. Because when you get corrected by somebody and the correction is not abusive, you'll know. One thing that I really want, that I would really ask for you to do, my audience, is that I want you to start listening to your intuition more. I have a video that I'd like for you to watch as to why we don't listen to our intuition. It's very common among people who have been through trauma or some sort of abuse to not listen to their intuition and listen to their gut. And it's a skill that you develop over time. But in your gut, you will know. There have been times that I'm sure all of us have received correction and we might not have liked it at the time, but we didn't think it was abusive. There's a very big difference between the two. And when you are corrected, it is for your benefit. It becomes abusive when it becomes about the other person's ego. So, a way you can think about it is, how was that correction delivered? In abusive situations, I've noticed that people use correction, or they pretend that they're correcting or rebuking somebody as a way of initiating a humiliation ritual. Okay. So they could say, oh, I'm correcting this person in front of the whole church or whatever, but they could have easily done that in private, right? Now, are there times where maybe somebody may need to say something to somebody in public? Yes. But in abusive situations, it's done to shame and it's done to humiliate, right? So, some of you have talked about how your personal stories that you have shared in confidence with somebody in a leadership position have been used against you in the pulpit. And they don't have to say your name. The fact that they're doing that, that is abuse. That's abusing their power. That is abusing your trust. When I talk about correction and rebuke, it goes along those same lines, right? If that is done in a public way to bring attention to you, either directly or indirectly, that's abusive, because that matter could have been handled behind closed doors. when you think about correcting somebody, there are times, like I said, where you might need to correct that person in a group of people, but if you don't have to, then why would you do that? So that is abusive. We talked about how it can, when we think about abusive correction, it has more to do with the person's ego. And so looking here at my notes here about what I'm going to be talking about here. Another thing that you will see when abusive correction or rebuke happens is that it's not timely. I have taught before. I have, I'm a psychologist and I have taught students who are in graduate school. I have supervised students in graduate school, and I have been taught and supervised myself. And one of the things that stands out to me about my best teachers and supervisors is that they gave feedback in a timely manner. They didn't wait. They would say something like, "Hey, you did this, you need to fix this." And that was that, right? Oh, don't do this the next time. People who are abusive will wait. And the reason they wait is because they want to build up a reason. They want to justify their drastic actions against you, right? So some people have been in situations where they were like in a I use church a lot, just simply because that's where a lot of you are coming from. It doesn't have to be church, it could be any spiritual environment, right? So they're doing something in that environment. Maybe they have a job, and then all of a sudden, like they're fired and they're told, you've been doing a horrible job, and we don't like, they have a whole list of like 50 things that you did that you didn't know about. That is abusive. And the reason is they could have all those 50 things that they listed, they could have taken the time to correct that behavior in the moment. So I want you to think about whatever situation that you're thinking about and ask yourself, was that correction timely or not? Um, and when I say timely, it doesn't have to be like right that second, but if somebody is like piling up tons of incidences that have happened over a significant amount of time, that's done for a reason. And this does not only happen in spiritual environments, it also happens in corporate and work environments. And so the types of leaders that do this are not very good at all. I think about teachers, supervisors, leaders that I've had that were awful. And that's one thing about all of them that I've noticed is that they did not give timely feedback. And when they were called out on it, they always had some kind of excuse like, oh, I'm busy, I'm sick, I forgot, I can't tell you everything. There's always a reason for why they can't do that. And after that, comes some sort of like punitive action, whether it is humiliating you in front of others or whatever. And they can justify that because they are saying, oh my gosh, look at all these things that you haven't done over the past 5 years. People who have abusive parents and abusive partners also will notice that they will engage in those techniques, right? So I think about that. I think about, when I have just heard stories, worked with people who have been through spiritual abuse, they will often talk about how they felt blindsided by the types of barrages that came against them from leaders and even from the relationship dynamic that they were in, right? And so there's, whether it's a partner or a parent talking about things that have happened for years, or this happened years ago and they're now bringing it up, or they might like piggyback with what someone else says. And then they might say something, oh, what did you hear that sermon today? And what he said, I feel that way about what you did X many years ago, right? So it is a way to gain control, and it is a way to catch you off guard, right? Because a good teacher and a good leader wants to see you succeed. And if you want people to succeed, you have to work with them in real time. Okay, so that is one thing that you will definitely notice. Something else too that you will notice is that the feedback is not particularly accurate, right? So they may speak in generalities. I remember I had a supervisor once, one of the worst supervisors I've ever had. And this supervisor, the way they gave feedback is that they would give feedback about your performance in front of everybody, and the feedback was really horrible. Like, not specific at all. So they would say things like that something was too cerebral. They would say, "Oh, that's so cerebral." And people would be like, well, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean I'm too cerebral? Can you give me a concrete example? And this person could not do that. She was just a horrible supervisor. She would say things like that. She would just give feedback out of the blue, and it wasn't even like specific, so things like, well, I feel, she would tell us that different people in our cohort that we were not engaged with people, and like, what does that mean to be engaged with people? Can you give an example? When we would ask for examples, there was nothing except more rage and more criticism. And so I want you to think about, like, when you have gotten that feedback, was it specific? If somebody cannot give you a specific example, that is a huge red flag, right? Especially if it's somebody who is in leadership in a spiritual situation. They should have examples. I don't know how people think that they can tell somebody that they're not doing something right or that they don't like something without one example. So you'll know that. Or they could give you an example, but the example doesn't like hold any water. It doesn't make sense to you. It could be like, oh, well, that's just, they'll say something and you'll know, right? Remember I talk about trusting your gut. You'll know it's not specific. Another thing is that it is not accurate, right? And so um, abusive feedback, abusive correction, abusive rebuke takes one concept and then changes the definition, right? So, for instance, let's say that you are in a spiritual environment and something negative happened to you, and you told somebody else, hey, this happened, I don't feel safe, or this is this type of person that did this, I don't feel safe around them, or whatever it is. And then you're told, well, you're gossiping. That's not gossip, right? That's not slander. It's not gossip. But people have been told that, yeah, it is gossip. If you say anything that is less than stellar about somebody, it's gossip. And so when you are told, hey, you are gossiping, that's abuse because you weren't gossiping. And a lot of people might be like, oh my gosh, well, it could, how can you take that leap into calling it abuse? And I'm going to tell you why. It's because in a spiritual environment, if somebody has authority over somebody, you have to really be very careful and very aware of that power dynamic and not use that power dynamic to vent your own personal frustrations on somebody else. And so when somebody is told, hey, you're gossiping, what's the reason they're telling them that? They want to shut them up. They're saying, I don't want you to talk to people about the negative things that are going on. You need to keep it to yourself. How are you supposed to gain safety and closure and heal from something if you cannot even bring it to the attention of the proper people, right? Things like that. I will do another video on spiritual abuse in marriage, but in a lot of these circles, especially evangelical circles, they will take the term respect and they will make it mean something else. Pretty much obedience to whoever it is, right? And it's not just in a dyad, like in a couple, but also within a leadership structure. So if you do not like something that a leader did, then you're automatically disrespectful. Or if you bring something to their attention, you make a suggestion, you don't agree with them, you don't like them or what they did, that's disrespectful and that's dishonorable. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's nonsense. We are allowed as human beings to think how we want and to feel how we want and even to do what we want. Now, are there going to be consequences? Yes, of course. But just because you respect somebody or you are in a position of or somebody is like in authority over you doesn't mean that you should lose your autonomy. And so spiritually abusive rebukes and corrections will take a concept and twist it to form their own narrative. And it oftentimes has to do with stripping you of power. And so you really want to listen to that because I remember when all this stuff with Daystar Television was going on a few months ago and they leaked the recordings, I remember that one person was telling the other person that disagreement is disrespect. And they were, person A was yelling at person B and saying, nope, disagreement is disrespect. If you disagree with me, you're disrespecting me. And that is, I could probably say that's spiritual abuse in a nutshell to a degree. However, you also just, you want to understand what exactly the problem is when you are talking with somebody who's doing this, right? And so if you're trying to understand what the problem is and they're taking one thing and, saying that this bad thing is what you're doing because you're not going along with their agenda, then that's a huge red flag. And so these are just some things that I will, I'll probably elaborate more on these in future videos, but I'd love to hear from you in the comment section. Do you have any questions about this? Do you have any concerns? What do you feel like is a spiritually abusive way of correcting or rebuking somebody, and what do you not think it is, right? And so there are many situations, of course, where people are going to need to be rebuked or, criticized or whatever if something happens. But the way it's done and the motives behind that are going to determine whether something is actually abusive or not. Okay. So that is all I have for today. I would love to hear from you in the comments, and just let me know what you think. And then also too, if you have any questions that you would like for me to answer in a video, please let me know in the comment section. Those things are really helpful for me. It helps me, just understand where you are coming from as an audience and things that I can do to, best meet your needs. So I hope you have a wonderful day that's filled with joy and peace. Bye-bye.